Again, I'm Helen Petersen. I'm our Sustainability Manager of Livable Buckhead. So I've been leading up our embodied carbon initiatives for the past year, working with our mTAP teams and talking to a lot of you guys here to learn about what you guys are doing at your own firms in terms of embodied carbon. So for us, it's definitely a buzzy word that we're talking about and we're thinking about a lot, but I know that's not the case for everybody in here. So I know, like Kelly, you said you've been doing this for 15 years. Let's get a raise of hands to just start off with the interactive portion of this. Who's been working on embodied carbon for like 5 years or more? Okay, how about 2 years? Yeah, that's our mTAP groups. And who has just learned about it in the last couple months since we've been bugging you with emails to come here? Okay, so we got some good range, good. But we really, since we've been introduced to this whole embodied carbon concept, we've really seen it as a way to differentiate the Buckhead market and put a little sustainability feather in our hat. We think we're already positioned as one of the most sustainable neighborhoods in Atlanta. We have our 3 MARTA stations, we have our 2 big shopping districts, and like me said, we have tons of Class A trophy properties that are already doing great work. And we see this as another way to just elevate what people are already doing and see if we can get some economic development going out of this. So that's kind of where our positioning is. So I just wanted to go over our history with embodied carbon based on our past 2 taps that have got us here. So Brad, correct me if I make any wrong statements, but this is our first team. And since we were kind of starting at square one, their goal was really to just focus on general education and socialize the concept of embodied carbon with our development community. So they created an embodied carbon guidebook, which provided resources for education, benchmarking, and tools for reducing embodied carbon. And then the big thing that they did was they created an embodied carbon action plan for us. So this outlined a path forward for our embodied carbon journey. So in the near term, the focus was again on education and awareness. And the next step was to, again, continue with that education, but also look to see if we could establish a baseline of embodied carbon in the Buckhead environment. And then in the midterm, to start incorporating the idea of the transparency with our development community. So maybe Livable Buckhead could put out some kind of award system for the best embodied carbon buildings, or do some volunteer reporting requirements, or even put out some kind of like low embodied carbon materials lists. And of course, the long-term goal was to see if we could put something in our zoning code that really elevates this topic and differentiates our market. So again, focused on convening stakeholder groups, encouraging the conversation around the value and importance of embodied carbon, and just increasing the transparency of our building materials. So we were lucky enough to get a second mTAP team, and their goal was to focus on that second step that the first group pointed out. So again, continuing education and looking to see if they could establish a baseline. So came to realize that establishing a baseline would be very time and data intensive. So they kind of went with a little bit more of a theoretical approach. They looked at the building composition of a typical multifamily high-rise building in Buckhead and plugged it into the EC3 tool, which is the Embodied Carbon and Construction Calculator tool. So they put in average concrete mixes and steel and glass and all that good stuff. And they ran the numbers and found an embodied carbon intensity for just a typical Buckhead building. And then they reran that analysis using more low carbon materials to see what is possibly achievable. So with highly available low carbon materials and simple design practice changes, they found that they could easily get to an 11% reduction in embodied carbon intensity. And then they went down to doing a little bit more intense engineering changes and some more maybe hard to find low carbon materials, and found that a 22% reduction is pretty achievable. So the next step was they looked at these proposed lower carbon materials to see what the availability was in the Atlanta market. And we were very pleased to find that for the most part, they were readily available and had no price increases. So here you can see there's good availability of recycled steel. With concrete, there's some good SCMs and easy design principles that provide no cost premium. And insulation, they even found some good materials that are offered at a discount. On windows, they did find that there is some price increases there. And curtain walls, which was another high embodied carbon material, they found that there could be some more discounts there. And lastly, the group studied different policies that are popping up in other jurisdictions around the country. So they found most of those policies fall into two different programs, usually prescriptive and performance-based programs. So the prescriptive programs typically look at materials on the individual level, potentially capping their global warming potential, or GWP, by looking at their EPDs, their environmental product declarations. So these policies are generally aimed at structural materials. They're a little bit easier to enforce because it's the project team simply just submitting EPDs. But they might not always result in a net positive benefit. Just because you're using more recycled steel, you might be still using a lot of it. So your embodied carbon of the whole building might not be going down under this approach. With the performance-based approach, those typically require an LCA, a life cycle building assessment. But these are usually more flexible for the design team to meet certain thresholds that might be set. But again, these can be more costly for the design team to perform, and they require more expertise on the enforcement side. So these are kind of the policy recommendations that they came up with that other cities have been putting out there. So the first is the embodied carbon narrative, which is probably like the least invasive and requires the project team to simply just describe the certain structure and enclosure systems that they've chosen for the building and list out any sustainability goals they might have. The next is that prescriptive approach, which is requiring to report on EPDs and GWP for high impact materials. And usually those go a next step further to limit those materials. And then lots of cities are also going the life cycle building approach. So, and then again, putting thresholds on the life cycle emissions that the building can have. And we've also seen some cities just comply with LEED, say buildings in this zoning code need to build to this LEED category. Not necessarily get to that certification, but build to those standards. So with both mTAPs, they were both extremely informative and provided a lot of great stakeholder feedback and got us excited that there's a lot of cities that are doing this, and it's not just the typical progressive ones, so that was encouraging for us. And the conversations that it spurred, we realized that a lot of you guys are already doing this work, whether you're calling it embodied carbon or not, or just sustainability goals. So we wanted to capitalize on that. And like Denise mentioned, we wanted to see if our general Buckhead audience was interested in pursuing this further. So we included a question about it in our State of the Buckhead survey. So we usually do this every 2 years, is that right, Denise? And it has all sorts of questions from like demographics, interests, concerns, goals for the neighborhood. So this was 2 new questions that we put in this year. So first we asked people, just if they were familiar with the term, and unsurprisingly, most people said no. But then we presented them with a definition of embodied carbon. And after people learned about it, most people said they were at least moderately to extremely, or thought that it was moderately to extremely important. So that kind of encouraged us to keep going on our embodied carbon journey, and we were lucky enough to come across this ULI grant to continue this work. And keep these conversations going and define what our next steps are. So again, to reiterate what we're trying to do today, we want to understand what other cities have been up to, what's been working for them, what hasn't. We want to hear from you guys and understand if tracking, measuring, reporting on embodied carbon is feasible. We want to know if this is something you even think is worthwhile. Can embodied policy lead to, selling our buildings better and bringing in, the high-end developers and tenants that we want to see here? And like Denise said, we want to promote sustainability, but we know we can't just do it on ourselves. It has to be something that everyone is comfortable with. So we want to see how far we can push the limits, but also, respect everybody's ability and commitment to this cause as well.